Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
Hello, podcast friends. Today is a very bittersweet day for your boy. This is going to be the last Minisode that I record in my apartment in Lexington, Kentucky. Now, I know all of you couldn't give two shits about that, but to me, someone who is very sentimental about where he lives and just little weird things like this, it means a lot to me. And so I wanted to make this Minisode a special one. I wanted to remember it and enjoy it and finish out strong and honor this apartment that I've been here for the past 2 years. So this is the first apartment that I've ever lived in by myself, and then also with my girlfriend. So yeah, it is special to me, and I'm going to be sad to not do any more minisodes in this room. But I will still be doing minisodes next time. So the reason why I won't be doing any more here is because we are moving to New York in a few weeks. And so the next couple minisodes will be at my parents' house because I'll be staying there until we are able to move into our apartment in New York. But soon we will be doing minisodes in the big city, and it should be very, very interesting. So for the last time in this apartment, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Minisode number 56 on the More Than Fitness podcast. Today's topic, we're going out with a bang, is intermittent fasting. Is it for you? So, the first things first with intermittent fasting. Everything that I'm about to say, take with a grain of salt, because I think intermittent fasting absolutely has its pros. I think it's very convenient for a lot of people. Everybody's busy, and intermittent fasting gives them a somewhat of a diet framework and structure to not think too much about their food choices and their entire diet plan and all of that stuff. It's just, hey, you eat during these 8 hours, you don't eat during these other 16 hours or something along those lines, right? And so for a lot of people, intermittent fasting has done a lot of great things. And you can eat bigger meals, which is amazing. But I don't think the benefits outweigh the costs. At least it depends, actually, right? It all goes back to what do you care about most? And also making sure that intermittent fasting is actually working for you, and you just don't think it's working for you, yet you have these myriad of problems that you just can't seem to figure out. But if you look closely, and maybe after this minisode, you're like, okay, maybe it's intermittent fasting that is causing me my issues. So that's just something that I wanted to disclaim this beginning with before we dive into why I think intermittent fasting may not be the best choice for some people. The first one is, and it's one that I don't think a lot of people talk about with intermittent fasting, honestly. And that's it's pretty obvious, though. It's just, it can create an unhealthy relationship with food. And that's always something that definitely needs to be considered whenever you're picking out a diet plan that works for you. You have to make sure that you put your mental health first before your fat loss and muscle gain goals. Right. And the reason why it can create an unhealthy relationship with food is because it's essentially, for some, it can be a restrict and binge pattern. So definitely nobody that's ever had an eating disorder should eat this way. And just as a example of why this could facilitate unhealthy eating patterns is because if you look at any type of literature or recommendations on people who are trying to get through eating disorders, which I'm assuming most of you haven't, but I'm a registered dietitian, so we've had some classes and things. But anybody who has had a eating disorder in the past or is currently going through one, one of the first things that they tell them to do is follow a simple meal pattern of 3 meals and 3 snacks per day. And this is just a constant meal pattern that allows your body to be regulated with meal timing throughout the day, and you're getting in plenty of food. It's not like huge meals or huge snacks throughout the day, but it's eating multiple times per day and making sure that you are fueling your body. You're not, going long stretches of time without food that can create issues and then cause you to binge and things. And so, yeah, that's like the biggest thing that a lot of eating disorder specialists recommend is making sure 3 meals, 3 snacks for each day. And so, as you can imagine, intermittent fasting is essentially the opposite. It's like, okay, have 1 to 2 big meals per day, and on the rest of the day, you fast. So again, I'm going to go back and forth here some, but I think if you have a healthy relationship with food, if you find yourself making intermittent fasting work with you, you're not obsessing over food, or you're not really stressing yourself out during the periods where you are fasting, you find it more effortless, then I think that's totally okay. Maybe you're a very good candidate for intermittent fasting. So, but if you find yourself, starving, your mood is terrible, you're anxious, you're stressed out during these intermittent fasting periods, well, then maybe the pros don't outweigh the cons there. So maybe you should reconsider that one. Okay, the next thing that I think you should consider is, since you're only eating 2 meals, right? You're probably eating with only 2 meals. You're going to be more susceptible to not eating enough protein for the day to fuel your muscle gain and fat loss goals, right? You're not going to be able to consume enough protein, especially if you aren't tracking. If you're tracking, obviously you can make an exception here if you want to eat a ton of protein at one time or 2 times throughout the day, right? But you could be lacking in protein intake, but you could also be lacking in just overall nutrition, right? So vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, fiber. If you only have 2 meals, you're going to have to make sure that you really make them count, right? Because if you have 3 meals and 2 snacks, or 3 meals and 1 snack or something, you have more opportunities to get in those vitamins and minerals and a more diverse selection of foods to choose from, which will probably equal more vitamins and minerals and more diverse nutrition that you're able to intake throughout the day, and you don't have to pay as much attention to that. So all I'm saying is that the amount of protein that you consider, the amount of protein that you eat with each of these meals is going to be very important if you want to optimize your muscle gain and fat loss. And honestly, if you're only eating 2 meals per day, you're probably, I know for sure, you're just not maximizing the progress that you could make in terms of muscle gain. It's not going to be a huge difference. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to make that, like it's a detriment or something like that, but you could optimize it by eating more meals. And I'll get to that in just a second. But if you want to, you could probably do 2 big meals and a shake. That's probably what I would recommend. I think 3 meals or 3 boluses of protein, so 3 protein feedings throughout the day, that's going to be the bare minimum that I would recommend for people. So if my clients or something want to do intermittent fasting, I'm like, okay, let's do 2 big meals and maybe a shake, either closer in the morning or right before bed or something. So it'd be probably about every 3 hours I'd recommend them eat. And of course, as you can imagine, if you're only going to have 2 meals and a snack, that can be difficult. So again, here we are with the dilemma in the first place. Okay, and then the next one is going to be, as I alluded to, the nutrient timing is going to be off. And so the research is pretty clear that 4+ feedings of protein throughout the day is going to be best for muscle gain. And that's because every time you consume protein, specifically if you consume more than about 20 to 25 grams at any time, you're going to stimulate what is called muscle protein synthesis. And this is just the signal to your body to make muscle mass, essentially to make muscle tissue. And so whenever you have 4 to 5 feedings, 3, 4, 5 feedings a day, you stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So it goes up and then down, up and then down. So you eat 1 meal, and I'll put it up. Actually, I've got a graphic. I can put it up where you can see whenever you eat a meal, muscle protein synthesis is stimulated, then it goes down, then you eat another meal, then it goes back up. And so the research has shown that you can probably max this out at about 5 times per day. And so with intermittent fasting, you've got to think, if you're both eating 2,000 calories, if you have one person that's doing intermittent fasting and one person eating 4 to 5 meals per day, the intermittent fasting person, they're only going, and they're both eating 2,000 calories, right? Well, the intermittent fasting person is eating 2,000 calories, sure, but then they're also not stimulating their muscle protein synthesis more than twice. Whereas the person who's having 2,000 calories, who's having 3, 4, 5 protein feedings per day, they're also eating 2,000 calories, but they're eating 2,000 calories, but they're also stimulating muscle protein synthesis way more times. And so it's just, it's how it is. You're going to more likely be building more muscle the more protein feedings that you have up to a certain extent, right? Like I said, 5 is about the max. So this would be a meal about every 3 to 5 hours throughout the day. And so with intermittent fasting, that nutrient timing is going to be not optimal. It's just the way it is. So with protein, the nutrient timing is going to be off. And then also with carbohydrates and so around your workouts and things, like if you're going to have, I'm assuming that most people that do intermittent fasting, they're going to try to bias those meals around their training. So they're going to have carbohydrate heavy meals around their training, which I think can be beneficial. But this leads me into the last point that I want to make. You also, whenever you consume carbohydrates, you guys have probably heard about insulin, right? So your pancreas releases this hormone called insulin. It brings down your blood glucose levels, but it also is it helps with storage, right? And it helps with storage in fat cells, but then also muscle cells. And actually, insulin is very anabolic whenever you use it correctly. So you hear people always, saying that insulin makes you fat and things like that. Well, the same storage mechanisms that it can make you fat, it can also be very anabolic in terms of building muscle mass. So if you, of course, lift, right? Exercise or resistance training is going to be the key here. If you resistance train and then also have multiple feedings of protein and carbohydrates throughout the day, well, just like like I said about muscle protein synthesis, you're stimulating muscle protein synthesis throughout the day whenever you eat meals. You're also signaling insulin to be released. And again, this is going to be an anabolic trigger, and it's going to help with the nutrient partitioning and things like that. That's just going to be more beneficial for muscle gain. And if you can trigger this insulin release multiple times, of course, this is where people say you have the big insulin spike and then you crash. And then if you eat correctly and you manage this correctly, which could be a whole other podcast, but if you manage this correctly and you have 3, 4, 5 meals a day and you do it smart, it's like you can use that insulin to your advantage, not to your detriment, right? And so insulin is very anabolic, and it'll just make the whole process easier. It also it goes with muscle protein synthesis. Whenever insulin is released, it kind of gives a little bit of boost to the muscle protein synthesis. I know we're getting to the nitty gritty here, but it's fun stuff. But whenever you're intermittent fasting, you don't necessarily get these multiple releases of insulin throughout the day, and so that can become an issue that you need to consider. I think for the most part, the other few notes that I have down here about intermittent fasting is that, especially if you're trying to gain muscle and you're trying to be in a calorie surplus, it's going to be difficult to eat that much amount. I think intermittent fasting, whenever you're trying to gain muscle, is just stupid. It's just, you're trying to fit in even more food than normal in fewer meals. It's just counterintuitive to the goal that you're trying to do. I wouldn't worry about that. As far as the actual benefits of fasting that people tend to tout, the research is not clear on those. And I think people also forget that you're fasting while you sleep. So all the benefits that a lot of people tout, like you don't need to benefit for 16 hours a day to get those benefits. You can sleep for 8 hours and get the majority of those benefits. And again, sure, you may get some benefits from fasting longer, but does that outweigh the cost? Right? That's what you have to remember. What are your goals here? So that's something that you need to consider as well. But and lastly, going back to about the nutrient timing and the muscle protein synthesis, whenever you are in a calorie deficit, right? So you're trying to lose body fat. You're in a calorie deficit. You're already low on nutrients. And so throughout the day, whenever your body, whenever say you eat breakfast or something, or so you eat breakfast, then you're going to digest and absorb that meal in 4 to 6 hours or something like that. But then after those 6 hours are up, if you don't eat another meal, well, then your body doesn't have any nutrients to pull from. And so it's going to have to start feeding off your muscle, basically, to keep it in simplistic terms. And so with intermittent fasting, you also risk losing more muscle mass whenever you're in a calorie deficit. I should have mentioned this earlier, but bring it up now. It's all good. You risk having your body use muscle for fuel instead of feeding it the appropriate amount throughout the day so that it actually has some nutrients to pull from. These are all things to consider. Again, these aren't like huge detriments to your training. It's going to make up somewhat of a 10 to 20% of your overall results. But some people may care about that. And if you have these issues, maybe you're not seeing the progress you want with intermittent fasting, you find yourself really anxious and stressed and moody during these periods of intermittent fasting. Well, I just want to let you know there are other ways to go about it. But for those of you who have a healthy relationship with food and you find intermittent fasting useful for you, by all means, be my guest, go for it. And you're okay with giving up a little bit of the optimization, I think that's totally fine. Live your life. Other than that, I think you should consider those and see if intermittent fasting is right for you. All right, ladies and gents, and all right, Lexington apartment, this is a wrap for Minisode number 56 on the More Than Fitness podcast. It's bittersweet, guys. It's bittersweet. However, the show will go on just at a different place. All right, that's it. Thank you, as always, for listening and for watching. See ya.